Alright, our next range review is going to be Disciples of Tzeentch. So this is the other Chaos army that I own. I've got 2 out of the 4. I'm looking to potentially get a 3rd soon. Overall, Tzeentch is probably the weirdest of all the Chaos factions. They've just got really weird, interesting demons, lots of spells, weird characters. And that's kind of why I like them. You can do a lot with them, a lot of weird colors and shapes and flowy stuff, and I really like that about them. So to me, that's one of the strengths of the armies. But if you don't like the way that they look, like you really don't like the way that Tzeentch looks. So we'll start off with the big guy himself, Kairos Fateweaver. So this is part of he is the named Lord of Change. The Lord of Change is like their version of a Bloodthirster or a Keeper of Secrets or some sort of, their big chaos demon guy. And Kairos is the named one. So he's got 2 heads. This kit can be built from the basic Lord of Change kit. It's the same kind of core body, just with some different options for the weapon, the hand, and the 2 heads. I actually like the regular Lord of Change more. I just think he looks a little bit better, but Kairos is really, really cool. I absolutely love the Lord of Change model. It's got so much detail and so much big open spaces, like these wings. You can do so much with in his body, and like a fun thing with Tzeentch is that you can make it weird, and it should be weird, and it shouldn't always make sense, and that's kind of what Tzeentch is about. So, somebody like Kairos, you might end up doing a little bit more traditional because he's a character that's supposed to look a certain way. But essentially, he's a Lord of Change just with 2 heads. So you've got a lot of really cool stuff going on. Like, there's so much detail, it's going to take a while to get into. He's got this book, these things, and some of these things are interchangeable. So like in the regular Lord of Change, this staff can be different things. He can get different weapons. He can get different poses. This model's really, really, really cool. It is a humongous undertaking to paint this model, though. There's so much stuff going on, and there's a lot of decisions that you kind of have to make as you go through it. Like a good example is like this leg here. So it looks like a rib cage, and so it's like, okay, so are you going to paint this like an armor plate? Because that would kind of work. Or in this case, they've painted it like bone that's coming out of his leg and morphing into feathers, which is also very Tzeentch. So there's like lots of little weird decisions like that you've got to make. Do you want to do traditional kind of fire? Do you want to do more glows? Do you want to do weird purple or blue or green fire? Like, there's a lot of options you can do with these models, and there's so much stuff going on. I mean, it will take you hours if you're doing this by hand. Like, it will take you hours to just paint the wings. My Lord of Change, I think, took close to, I want to say like 16 hours to finish. And even then, like, I could have spent easily another 10 hours probably on him. But I got to the point where I was just like, I need him to just be done. I'm entering him for a painting competition locally, and I need him done. And I ended up winning that competition because there's just, you can look at this model and paint it and look at it for like 15 minutes and still not find everything. This is a really, 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 really cool, intricate, difficult kit to build and paint. $140 seems really expensive, but that's the same as all the other greater demons. And I think with this kit, you get so much cool stuff. And I think he's the best looking of all the greater demons. So I kind of did Kairos with the Lord of Change. So I'll just go to the Lord of Change really quick. So there's the regular Lord of Change. So you can see, he's got a sword option. He can also have this like rod of sorcery option, which is like a thing, a wand essentially. He's got different head options, 2 or 3 different head options, I believe. comes with lots of different bases, lots of different like arms and armor and all sorts of stuff. So this model's really, really cool. And I think this, when you compare this to like the old Lord of Change, it's incredible. Like this is such a good kit. I highly recommend, if you're gonna play Tzeentch, this is one of the kits you absolutely must get. Even if you just play Chaos and are just interested in like building and painting, or you're just interested in building and painting, like this is a kit to go for. I would say this is one of the most challenging kits to build and paint that Games Workshop has. So keep that in mind. But it is well worth all of the effort you put into him. Yeah, he's really cool. And he's huge. I mean, this is a brimstone, so a regular guy comes up to about here. So he's giant and awesome, and he's just such a cool centerpiece. All right, and now moving on to like the wimpiest character. So this is a Magister. For $15, this is pretty cheap. He's a good little model. He looks very weird. This expression of like "oh" is kind of funny. He's got these like stocky bird legs, like a egret or a herring, not a heron or something. Yeah, I mean he's fine. He's very spindly. Like he you look at him and you're like, oh wow, he seems pretty big and tall, but he's really spindly. And intricate to paint, but he's a pretty simple model for $15. Like he's worth picking up for sure. I mean, I painted mine in like 2 or 3 hours, and yeah, he's fine. The Curseling. So this is a very weird model, and this is where we start to get into like why Tzeentch to me is so interesting, but also so weird, and some people don't like it. So this is like a mortal chaos warrior that's been inhabited by a demon, which is this guy here, that's like growing out of his shoulder and whispers into his ear and tells him spells and stuff. And he's this weird mix of like a mage and a chaos warrior. He's got literally like a twin growth coming out of his shoulder that's talking to him, and the twin is it's like two models smashed into one, and it's so weird. And he's got feathers and stuff. This is a motif you'll see a lot with Tzeentch, is feathers and like the Lord of Change, very avian kind of bird features. But he's really cool. He's so weird. Like the one thing I don't like about this is this big spike. I know it's a game and it's silly and all that or whatever, but like this just seems impractically huge and kind of dumb to me. Like if this was just a cool demon head, I think it'd look just as good and would make a lot more sense. So yeah, the Curseling for $25, again, like that's a pretty good price for a hero. He's got a lot of detail, and you can have a lot of fun painting a model like this. You kind of get to do everything. You got armor, skin, feathers, glowing like demon weapons, glow effects, scales. You've kind of got all the textures going on here, leather. So this guy could be really, really fun to paint. Gaunt Summoner. To me, this is a mandatory model. If you are going to start a Tzeentch army, a Disciples of Tzeentch army, like you have to buy a Gaunt Summoner because they're so good. And the model is very weird and cool. So again, he's like a Magister that's kind of been upgraded. So he's very spindly. He's got these skinny little hands and stuff. But he's got this really weird, like Pan's Labyrinth kind of head, where he doesn't have eyes, but his eyes have kind of crept up his helmet, and he's got all these different eyes and stuff. And again, more feathers, so really fun to paint there. Feathers, cloth, armor, flames. Like you've got a lot of textures to work with again. A lot of Tzeentch stuff has multiple textures, and you can paint them kind of different ways. Like this could be painted like skulls, like a bone, like they've done here. I painted mine to look like sculpted metal, like it's armor. You can do a lot of stuff, and there's some cool details with the book with the flames coming out. This staff is really neat looking, the eyeball. Very like spacey, kind of weird, sci-fi alien almost. I like the Gaunt Summoner, and if you have the Silver Tower version of him, he's got these 4 little like imp guys that follow him around, and those are really fun to paint too. So this is the Changeling, not to be confused with the Curseling. This model is, again, a lot of textures and weird flowy curves and stuff. So he's almost like a ghost figure floating through this demon sort of like plasma stuff. He's got 3 arms on one side, 1 arm on this with the staff. This model has got a lot of good motion to it. So he's got a very like flowy cloak, and almost has the same pose as like a Flamer of Tzeentch, but he's a horror, I believe. He's like a horror human wizard. He's really weird. The staff I kind of don't like though. It's got cool stuff with like the bird skull going into a snake, and then the head of the snake is like a fish, and like that's just super weird. But it looks kind of like a lizard man or like a Native American or like Aztec kind of staff, as opposed to kind of like a demon staff. That's kind of the one thing I don't really like about it. And I don't particularly like this either, that his cloak is sort of like open and flowy, but you can't see his legs, and I guess he's made of this wispy stuff. I'm not really sure. I kind of wish he was just like floating above the ground, so you didn't really see into the cloak. But Zeng Gores Shaman. So Zeng Gores are essentially Tzeentch beastmen. So they're mutated, but they have much more bird-like qualities to them than like a pig or a ox or a horse or something, or a goat, like a lot of the other beastmen. I think the best thing about the Zeng Gores Shaman is the discs, and you'll see a lot of the discs of Tzeentch have gotten redone, and they look really cool with these swooshes and lots of details here. I don't really like Zeng Gores. I get why people like them. They're just kind of weird. I don't really like them a whole lot. But he's got some cool stuff. This helmet's pretty cool, where it's open and he's got these horns and feathers. But it's the same thing. Like, I don't really like beastmen in general, and so these are Tzeentch beastmen, so I still don't really like them. But of all the beastmen, I think Zeng Gores probably look the best. And I know people that love these models. So he's good. Again, lots of different textures. You got skin, armor, feathers, demon weapon stuff, swirls, metals. Like, you've got a lot going on. So these can be really fun to build and paint, but they're very intricate. Bleh. The old Fatemaster. So this is like what the old Tzeentch discs used to look like, and it's just very blah. I don't know, just boring flight base. And he's really static. There's not really much to say. This is an old model that used to be metal and was recast in resin, and yeah, it's pretty whatever. The helmet is cool, and this sort of shield with the eye on it is cool, but that's basically it. I would make a Fatemaster out of like a Magister and put him on a disc. The Blue Scribes. So this model's okay. Again, it's kind of got the old flight base, so it's got this, but at least this has its own custom thing that's sort of like a magic carpet. I actually don't have this model in particular. I converted mine out of some leftover bits, which I know a lot of people have done, because essentially it's just 2 blue horrors with some books and scrolls and stuff on a disc. So this setup is very like old school Warhammer looking, but I still think it looks pretty good. It's got a lot of little intricate details on there, these with the weird hands and stuff. I just wish these guys were a little bit more special looking, because they basically just look like regular blue horrors, which, when I converted, is exactly what I used, just regular blue horrors, but I painted them slightly differently. So this is an okay model. It feels old still, but it's got some good stuff. For $40, it's at least more worth it than some of the other stuff, but I would still probably be able to convert something just as good. So yeah, Blue Scribes, okay, it's okay. It's an alright model. Right, Fluxmaster. So this is a Herald of Tzeentch on a disc. This one has the old flight base as well. And I'm not sure if this is a newer sculpt or it's just a recasting of an old sculpt. He's kind of weird. He's got this really weird bird head that's like his body is also still his head. And he's kind of got his own disc. So the discs are screamers that get transformed into the discs. And this one looks much more like a screamer, where it's still got the little tails and the horn sticking out, as opposed to being like locked in this weird cage of metal. So he's pretty cool. You got the same, more textures. You got skin, horns, leather books, daggers, weird skin, and you can paint them kind of however you want. Technically, he's a pink horror, but he's a herald, so he could be green. Like, it doesn't matter. So that's what's really fun with a lot of Tzeentch stuff, is you can kind of paint it however you want, within, some semblance of reason, and they'll look good. Again, this is a very spindly kind of model. A lot of Tzeentch stuff is very intricate and small, so you can spend a lot of time painting one guy. Alright, last but not least, the Ogre Thaumaturge. I don't know why he's $41. That seems weird to me, but whatever. This is a really cool model. This is the only sort of Beastmen thing that I like, is the Ogroids, because I like ogres. I played them in fantasy. And so this is like an ogre wizard, but he's mostly an ogre, and he just beats the crap out of you. But he's also able to cast spells. And he's got this very primal kind of spellcaster feel to him. I particularly really, really like all the tattoos that are engraved in his body that glow with energy when he casts spells. That's sort of the idea. And he's so cool. This is one of those models that came out and kind of was like, all right, I think I should start a Tzeentch army, because I love this model. I actually still haven't painted mine because I don't use him very much at all in the game, but I have two of these. One is probably going to become a Demon Prince of Tzeentch, and then one is going to be the Ogroid. But there's a lot of really cool things, and I've seen so many different paint jobs with this. You can paint him flesh tone or blue like Tzeentch. You can paint the runes whatever color you want. You can paint him scars. You can paint him they're glowing fire or whatever. He's just really good. He's a big, open model, chunky model, nothing too worried about breaking on him, and he's just really imposing and awesome looking. So this is one of the best models in the range. Alright, so moving on to units. I'm going to start with the troops. I'm kind of going to jump around the core units. So first we'll start with horrors. So horrors are weird, so I'll start with pink horrors. Now they're all just called horrors of Tzeentch, because the way that these work is you've got pink horrors, blue horrors, and brimstone horrors. When a pink horror dies, he becomes 2 blue horrors. And when a blue horror dies, he becomes 2 brimstone horrors. You get 2 brimstones on one base. So when looking at these models, you go, okay, I get 10 for $35. But 10 is also 20 blue horrors and 20 brimstone horrors. So it's a lot of money to begin with the pink horrors. That said, these are one of the most iconic Tzeentch things, and probably everyone's going to take some. They're super annoying on the table, and I think they're kind of cool looking. They're very weird and wacky, and they're kind of goofy, but they're sort of also scary in how goofy they are, and conceptually they're scary. The one thing I will say about these is that their posing is they get tangled up on everything, because they've got these sticking out arms and horns and tongues, and they get stuck to each other and onto things really easily, and that can be a pain in the butt. But they're pretty quick to paint, especially with contrast. You can paint these guys up, dry brush them, paint the tongues, the teeth, and the swords or whatever, the metal. And you can get 10, 20 of these guys done in a few hours without too much effort, and that's awesome, because you're going to be painting a lot of them. So, yeah, pink horrors, they're pretty iconic when it comes to Tzeentch, so I feel like this is kind of a mandatory kit. So then these are the other horrors. So these are blues. I think the blues are actually the coolest looking of all of them. They're a little bit smaller, but they have the weirdest faces and like these kind of football poses and running and jumping and being crazy. And I really like the blue horrors. They look really neat to me. And again, you can paint these pretty quick. You know, you just use the blue contrast, some dry brushing, flame effects. You know, they're pretty quick to paint and they're really fun. So yeah, blues are neat. And again, you don't have to paint them blue. Like pinks don't have to be pink. Like you could have the pinks be yellows, the blues be purples, and then the brimstones be like green fire, and no one's really gonna be mad at you. You probably just need to distinguish what is what. So these are brimstones. They're pretty basic. There's not really much detail here. They're just little fireballs with teeth, essentially. Yeah, again, these are really fast to paint as well. So these are screamers. These are another Tzeentch demon. They're basically like manta rays. I think these are really cool. They could use a better base. They still have the old school flying base, which just, I don't know, it looks kind of weird when you compare it to like the new discs and stuff, but they're okay. They're used a lot in other models too. Like you'll see screamers attached to chariots. You'll see people riding on screamers and stuff. They're pretty fun to paint. They've got this weird like fish quality to them, which is very different from like the bird quality that a lot of your stuff is painting. Lots of eyeballs and spikes and horns. So they're pretty neat little models. And you can paint these with lots of different techniques, blends, you know, multiple colors, space looking, underwater looking. You can do a lot of fun stuff with them. We'll go back. So here's a Fate Skimmer. This is one of the like chariots in quotes. So essentially it's a disc being pulled by two screamers. And it's essentially a pink horror spellcaster with some cool options riding on top of one of these. So it's neat. The guy on top is really cool riding the disc. But this is a weird model. It's got this sort of like nebula wave thing, which is cool, but it's sort of weird. Like, I don't know. There's something about it that doesn't really strike me as great. Like, it's not that great to me. I feel like this guy just like on a disc being pulled by these would be better without this nebula thing, but it's a good kit. I mean, for $40, you get a lot of stuff, and you can make this into multiple things. I believe it can be a Fate Skimmer, it can be a Herald on Chariot, it can be a Burning Chariot, or it can be this guy plus like an Exalted Flamer. So you've got a lot of options from this kit, which is just one thing. And it's got a lot of good bits, like these books. And yeah, so like here's an Exalted Flamer. It's got a lot of good bits that you can use to convert other things. These books coming up like this, though, are just going to break a lot of the time, which is sort of crummy. And here are Flamers. So Flamers got a humongous buff in the new book they just got, that Tzeentch got. These are very old models. A lot of the sculpts and kind of the way they go together feels very old, but they still hold up because they're just so weird looking. That you can do a lot of weird things and fun paint schemes and blends with these guys, but like they're really weird. They're one of the weirdest models in the game, in my opinion. Lots of like little teeth and flames and hidden stuff. They're good practice if you want to practice like blending and skin tones and fire. They're really, really weird. These are one of those, I think, kind of a not controversial, but one of those make or break models that, like, if you like Flamers, you'll probably like Tzeentch Demons, and if you don't, like, you won't like them. You won't like Tzeentch Demons. So I like them because they're just so weird looking. Whereas a lot of people go like, ugh, those look horrible. Like, why would you ever buy those or build them? So yeah, Flamers are a weird one. So sticking with the Flamers really quick, we'll go to the Exalted Flamer. So this you can get out of the Chariot kit, because you can make an Exalted Flamer, or you can make a Burning Chariot, which is basically this guy on top of that chariot that's being pulled by the Screamers. Again, this is weird. He's basically just a giant flamer. He's got a bigger fire plume. He's got, a secondary head, and he's just a little bit beefier. This you can make some really fun fades with, but essentially he's just a giant flamer. So then continuing down that line, so this is the burning chariot. So this is the chariot with an exalted flamer on it. This model is also very weird, but I think looks a little bit better than the other one because it's got this theme of fire throughout it. So like instead of this being a gooey like nebula thing, it's fire, which makes sense that they're riding on fire and he's shooting fire and there's fire everywhere. The blue horrors are a little unnecessary to me. I think you could get rid of those. I got rid of mine and turned them into just more blue horrors. But other than that, it's the same thing. I mean, it's an exalted flamer on a chariot. So, alright, so Zeng Gores are the core sort of like mortal unit that's exclusive to Tzeentch. They're essentially beastmen. They've got some really cool stuff. I don't really like Zeng Gores that much looks-wise and all that, but they've got some really cool options. So like this option's super weird, where his head is like split in half and is still alive and is like mutating together or away from each other. Like weird stuff like that gives them a lot of character, which can be neat. You can give them a couple weapon options, and the weapons all have this kind of like magical, wispy, sort of like Middle Eastern saber kind of Aladdin dagger thing going on, which is a neat look. But and they got these like maces, the swords and shields, and then I believe they can have double weapons. Banner, big old sword. So they're neat. They've got some cool stuff. They're just not really my style. Some people might really love these, and that's great. They do look pretty impressive when you've got a big block of them, big blob of like 30 of them or 20 of them running around together. Like it looks pretty neat in that sense that they're just these like they're so crazy looking, but they're not my thing. Okay, and then these are Zeng Enlightened. So these are like elite Zeng Gores that ride on chariots. Or not chariots, that ride on discs. So these are really cool. I really like the discs on these. They're all different. Each disc is different. They each have a different little thing. And each guy is very different as well. So this is a really neat kit for that reason alone, is that you get a lot of interesting single things. I mean, and you can spend like the detail on one of these guys is like the same as some heroes in other armies. I mean, you can spend hours just painting one of these. So for that reason, they can be really, really cool to own, to get a kit. He's got this wispy thing, this spidery kind of hands, fire, lots of textures, metal, skin, feathers, fire, magic. You got a lot going on. Tzeentch stuff is very intricate to paint, so that can be a fun challenge. But if this is like your first kind of army or foray, like this can be incredibly difficult and very frustrating because there's a lot going on. Then here's Zeng Gores Skyfires. So these are the elite Zeng Gores, but they're like an archery unit instead. Same idea. It comes from the same kit. So they have the same discs, but different guys on top. And even then, it's kind of the same poses. You just give them different weapons. I think these bows are really cool with these like coiled arrows. I like these guys more than the Enlightened. Just looks wise. They feel like weirder and more unique and Tzeentchy. And yeah, I mean, again, textures. You got like wisp, the thing, skin, armor, cloth, bow and arrow, feathers, horns. You got everything going on. So very challenging to paint, but you can have a lot of fun painting, each one of these guys. And then this is kind of the basic dudes. These are Kyra Acolytes. So I actually really like the Kyra Acolyte models, but they kind of feel a little bit weird for Tzeentch because they're so buff. Like they feel like more like a Khorne unit or something, or just a general like Chaos Marauder unit. In the lore, they explain why, but they seem a little bit too buff to me. Like I wish they were kind of more just regular looking human guys with these crazy weird helmets, but they've got a lot of really cool options. So these would be like the cultists of Tzeentch essentially. So like how you had Blood Reavers, you have Kyra Acolytes for Tzeentch. So I like the shields. The shields are very cool. The weapons are very weird and squiggly and not normal. And their masks are really neat. They've got these sort of like cultist bird face masks. They're just too buff. Like that's the one thing. I know that's weird to say, but they don't feel very Tzeentch. They feel much more like Khorne or just general chaos warrior type guys as opposed to like kind of creepy cult leaders. This guy's really cool with the bird jumping off. This is a really, really neat model that kind of sells this kit as well. I think is this guy in particular is great. This bird's really cool and weird. He's got a weird mask. Lots of good movement on him. And the good old Spawn. So, Chaos Spawn. This is a really weird kit. It's very old, and it feels very old and kind of clunky in how you put it together. But that's sort of the fun of this kit, is there's so many weird things. Basically, it's 2 bodies, and then just a bunch of different like points at which you can attach any like random things. So, you know, this here could be a head, it could be a mouth, it can be an eyeball, it can be a tentacle. You could put the eyeball over here. Like, you can do tons of weird stuff with this model kit, and it gives you lots of options. It's like here's a big like skin guy with spikes, and then here's like a more beastman looking one with tentacles and, you know, horns and weird stuff. And then here's like an eyeball guy with a big crab claw. So like you can mix, and it gives you kind of parts from each god. So this would be kind of a Slanesh arm, but not necessarily. You know, they've got kind of beastmen like furry stuff attached to them. They're so weird, and you can just make them really crazy. And you could probably buy this kit like 15 times and not make one that looks the same. It gets you tons of bits and stuff. The one problem with this kit is that because it's so like mix and match, some of the parts leave pretty obvious gaps where you've attached them, and that feels kind of old. But yeah, Spawn are really fun to build and paint because you can just do anything. It's like literally just here's a bunch of parts, put them on however you want, and it actually makes, the more random and more like messy and weird it is, the more it makes sense. It's like here's a Khorne spawn. You get a Khorne head. Lots, like so many weird options, and then you just get tons of bits, and the bits you can use for all sorts of stuff. So the spawn kit's actually really, really fun. You get 2 per kit. Alright, so that's the main Tzeentch stuff. There's a couple other units that Tzeentch can use, but are part of the overall like Chaos faction. Like Demon Princes, the Vortex Beast, and some other stuff like that. So I'll go over those in a different video. These are just the very like exclusive Tzeentch things. The other thing that they have is they've got their endless spells. These are the endless spells for the Disciples of Tzeentch. So these are just like Khorne or Slanesh have their own unique kind of spells or terrain or whatever. Tzeentch gets these 3 spells, which is the Tome of Eyes, the Icon of Tzeentch, and then the Demonic Simulacrum. And so these can be summoned by any of your wizards, and you're going to have lots of wizards. And then they'll give, you know, they'll do certain things or give certain effects. I wouldn't say these are super necessary for Tzeentch because you have so many spells and options already. But they're cool, and they're not particularly hard to build or paint because they're mostly fire. But they can be cool little, you know, centerpieces, or not centerpieces, cool little like details that you could add to your army if you're just trying to make a display. and their rules are okay. So I'll use them from time to time, and they're cool. They're cool models. So I wouldn't say these are a necessary purchase, but if you're playing Tzeentch a lot for $35, you get some cool models. I particularly like the Demonic Simulacrum. There's this like Lord of Change. It's basically exactly the heads from the Lord of Change kit, just coming out of this like vortex thing. So they're neat. And Tzeentch models also work really well with the generic endless spells. You can make some really cool looking effects, or even on the tabletop they can get good benefits from the regular endless spells as well. So that's Tzeentch. They are I would say they're one of the more advanced or more difficult factions to build and paint and play. I would not say this is a very beginner friendly army at all, because a lot of their kits are very intricate, have a lot of little spindly parts that can break. And painting them, there's tons of details, and because they're so spindly, you're going to need to take a lot of time to really figure out what bits are going to be painted, what colors, and where, and how you're going to do that. But if you're looking for that challenge, or you're more experienced, this can be a really, really fun army to build and paint, because you have a lot of freedom to do really cool effects. You've got lots of textures to show off, like skin and horns and feathers and fire and metals all together, and I think a really well painted Tzeentch army looks really impressive. It's very colorful but still uniform, and it's a challenge. So when you see a really good Tzeentch army, it's even more impressive knowing how difficult it is to actually pull it off. This is probably the hardest army that I've had building and painting, but is one of the most rewarding for that reason. So yeah, there we go. Disciples of Tzeentch.